You began to plant the seed in people's minds. But I think in the process, you did create a media image of me that's far beyond, the reality of me.
And this craving, this awful, raging, eating feeling inside. I could feel it consuming my insides. It was overwhelming me.
Hello again, and welcome to Serial Killing, a podcast. My name is Elissa Kerrill, and I am the host, writer, the editor, all of the things. And over here, we talk about all manner of true crime at this point, but we also get, the whole picture to fully explore the nature versus nurture aspect of people who commit these horrible crimes. If you enjoy learning the what and the why, well, then you've come to the right place. Subscribe, like, follow, everything is in the notes below. Right, so as I said in the last episode where I covered Queen Eileen, Miss Warnos, you guys that have been with me for a long time will know that I am not a fan of the current movement that involves the perpetual hating on all men. My own mother talked horrible about men my entire life, and I literally watched her mentally ruin so many good ones. So I understand that there are actually a lot of good men out there. And the good ones already understand that we don't want to be so wary of them, but there's just no dependable way to be able to tell the good ones from the predators. In Eileen's episode, I talked about how women this day and age truly feel more like prey than we have in a really long time. There's been 0 Epstein arrests or really any consequences whatsoever, and the over 62 million hits on the hard R Sexual Assault Word Academy online, where men share stories about how they render their girlfriends or wives or partners completely unconscious and allow others to assault them. 62 million in just this past February, and it's no wonder that women are furious. However, there are a lot of women that are currently sort of poking the rest of us women who are trying to say, not all men, making us feel as if standing up for the good men is a bad thing. Well, I also said that I am nothing if not fair, and I refuse to bow to that kind of pressure just because I am a female. I'm not bandwagoning. I will not jump on the all men are evil because it is illogical, untrue, and that narrative helps nothing but perpetuate stigmas. Conversations need to be had, right? I've known quite a lot of men that it would never even dawn on them to do anything nefarious to a woman or a child. They recognize that they don't have to perpetually exist in this anxious state we women do, right? Watching over their shoulders, mentally preparing for some level of attack, and they get that we are exhausted. So many are really holding themselves accountable and calling out other men who are predatory, and to the men doing that, we love you. We applaud you. You are kings. Thank you for standing up for us. I also want to reiterate that men get horrifically abused, both mentally and physically as well. I've seen several documentaries and have known a few personally that have endured terrible abuse. But because they're men, they've been taught that it's not okay to have feelings about it. Society has taught them their entire lives that they are to be strong and quietly stoic and never have a bad day where they just might pop off unintentionally. Stiff upper lip, get over it, don't be a wuss, rub some dirt in it, on and on. We want our men to be plugged into us and to be connected with us, to be sensitive and understanding and be our equal and opposite, and on and on. Then how about we women hold other abusive women accountable? We want men to call out toxic men on their bullshit, right? We women need to do that to these ratchet, toxic, basic-ass, great value brand women who abuse men. Fair is fair. Because clearly our government doesn't give a shit about us or justice, so we are going to have to take it upon ourselves to sort these new social rules out, get everyone, no matter how you identify, on board and do better with each other. Hold each other accountable and make things better, not just men. So, I chose a man to cover who, if perhaps he had had the proper connection and bond with the most important and influential person in his life, his own mother, well, he might not have gone on to be a serial killer. Women need to remember that most of the men who are toxic have some underlying crack in the very foundation that led them to be that way. Men from healthy homes where their parents love and respect each other and the son has a strong, healthy, and appropriate bond with his mother rarely go on to be toxic men. Generalization, I understand. That's not to say that it's entirely unheard of, male or female, but most often, men in very healthy childhood environments do not grow up to be predators. This is, of course, again, like I said, a generalization, but you get it. Perhaps the women in these boys' lives, right, need to hold themselves accountable for how they prioritized other men, aside from their sons or themselves, how they treated their sons, and the fathers should take some accountability for raising their sons to know that men and women are equal on opposite ends of the spectrum. It is that they meet in the middle to make a whole partnership. And as we become parents, we would do well to remember that we are releasing new humans out into the world and the mind-blowing responsibility that that entails. Again, generalization as we have partnerships of all kinds, but you get what I'm saying. So this week's podcast is a revisit of Edmund Kemper, a very cautionary tale of what can happen if a mother allows herself to decide she doesn't like her own son and the abuse and neglect that her son endured because of her decisions, and how very badly that toxicity can end. Edmund Emil Kemper III was born on December 18th, 1948 in Burbank, California. That makes him a Sagittarius for those that enjoy. For this episode, I'm going to go ahead and skip the history of the world during that time because we've gone over it a bajillion times, being barely after World War II, not to mention we're going to talk about the Edmund Kemper, whom I could talk about for days. Now, it is hard for me to accurately express just how important Edmund is to me. That's not to say that I agree with the things that he did. I absolutely don't. I really don't. Okay? But long before the Netflix show Mindhunters and some of these other sort of B movies about him, so many years ago, when I learned about Edmund, his story struck a chord with me in a way that all of you will learn the specifics about soon enough, if you don't know already. Edmund's mother and my own were very much alike, so I understand his pain better than others. This podcast will probably be fairly long because, quite frankly, he's just one that I know a whole lot about, and there is a plethora of information on him and to learn about him. Now, he's a very elderly man to this day, but as of this recording, he is also still alive, finishing his life sentence in Vacaville Prison in California. Last I heard, he was wheelchair bound. He's at least had one stroke, but he is hanging in there. Edmund was the third to be given his name. So let's go back into his family history, right? Let's start with his father's parents. So we're going down the paternal line. So Edmund Sr., that would be our Ed's paternal grandfather, was born in 1892 in Mount Vernon, Indiana. His father was Frederick Augustus Reinhardt Kemper, born in Indiana as well in 1861. Edmund Sr.'s mother was Bertha Anna Haas Kemper, born in 1863, also in Indiana, though her parents were from Germany. So the two married in 1884. Edmund Sr. was the third out of 6 brothers. Some of these brothers continued their lives in Indiana, others moved to Tennessee, some to Missouri, and at some point, after his father had died, Edmund Sr. moved out to California and was farming. Again, this is our Ed's grandfather, born in Indiana. After his dad died, he moved out to California, and he started farming. Edmund Sr. went on to marry Maud Matilda Huey, who was born in 1897 in Topeka, Kansas. Maud's father was Henry McClellan Huey, born in North Carolina. Her mother was Viola Elizabeth Doge Huey, born in Kansas. Maud was the sixth of 7 children, 4 girls and 2 boys. So Viola died when Maud was only 5 years old. This is Edmund's paternal grandmother. Herself and a few of her siblings moved out west, Maud landing in Los Angeles in 1910 when she was in her very early teens. Some stayed back in Kansas. A couple of her siblings that went to California went on up to Washington State, the Pacific Northwest. Now, I couldn't seem to find out exactly how they met, but Edmund the First and Maud did marry in Los Angeles, California in 1914 when Edmund Sr. was 22 and Maud was 17, which was perfectly typical for the times. Edmund Sr. enlisted in the Army in 1917 and served during World War I. After, he worked as an electrician for the California State Division of Highways. Maud was a painter, and you can actually find photos of her paintings online if you search. There was definitely talent there. She signed her paintings Huey Kemper. She was described as highly intelligent, with a strong mind and personality to boot. She did not suffer fools lightly, as the saying goes. She was direct, she was blunt, she didn't hold her opinions back, etc. Our Edmund described her as domineering, being overly critical of her rather handsome husband. She ruled the roost, to say the least. So the couple had 3 boys, including Edmund Kemper Jr., the firstborn, who was born in 1919. Now, he and his brothers were ruled by their mother, Maud. When Edmund Jr. was 20 years old and standing at an impressive 6 feet 7 inches tall, he enlisted in the Army in 1939 and served in World War II during his enlistment. So that's 2 generations of men that went off to war, very, very serious wars. And that is the history of our Ed's father. Now let's get on over to his mother's side. So Clarnell Elizabeth Stage was born in 1921 in Winnett, Montana. Her father was Clarence Albert Stage, born in South Dakota. His father had hailed from Canada. His mother, Elizabeth Allen, had hailed from Tennessee. So Clarnell named one of her future daughters after her paternal grandmother, spelling and all, Allyn. Clarnell's mother was Nellie Nina Newdigate Stage, born in Iowa. Clarence and Nellie were married in 1908, settled in Montana, and began their family. Clarnell had an older brother, Rex, and an older sister, Elnora. Now, this brother and sister were born early into the parents' marriage, but Clarnell was born later, 12 years after the first child. Our Edmund stated that Clarnell's own mother was also domineering, just like Maud. Clarence, her father, was described as meek and quiet, letting his wife control the relationship. Interesting side story, by the way, kind of sidebar. Her brother Rex, who was a rather handsome young man, by the way, was a 2nd lieutenant in the Air Force and stationed in a training base near the panhandle of Texas. One day, when he was flying a B-17 bomber, out of nowhere he decided to fly extremely low to a highway, and the landing gear struck the top of a bus, which was carrying 28 passengers. There were no injuries, but he was, of course, reprimanded. At his trial, they asked him, "Why did you do that?" And he said he was, quote, prompted by an irrepressible desire to experience the behavior of a B-17 at an extremely low altitude, end quote, but stated he did not intentionally hit the bus. He was, of course, found guilty, kicked out of the Army, all of that. It's still interesting, and get this, President Roosevelt himself confirmed that Rex had been court-martialed. He got a shout-out from the president, negatively reinforcing, but you're seeing some impulse issues in the genetics there, right? Now, Clarnell, again, Ed's mother, herself, was a pretty attractive lady in her youth, quite tall at 6 feet, and according to her high school photo in either a yearbook or possible school newspaper, She wanted to be a secretary when she grew up, and her favorite class was typing. She was in band, in the Sculptors Club, the Young Authors Club, was on the Junior Prom Committee, as well as Quill and Scroll Club. So she was quite active during her high school days, very high achieving. She was known to be headstrong, independent, and a highly intelligent young woman. So Edmund Jr., being in the service, was briefly stationed at Fort William Henry Henderson, which was just outside of Helena, Montana, where Clarnell was working as a secretary. The base he was working at was training soldiers to be a kind of specific soldier that was willing to go on suicide missions, meaning they discouraged the men from being or getting married. But when Edmund Jr. and Clarnell met, the attraction was strong, and they quietly got married on November 26th, 1942, in Great Falls, Montana. So the couple had their first daughter in 1943, while Edmund Jr. was still serving his country, working with the government testing atomic bombs in the Pacific Proving Grounds. So he was testing atomic bombs. I mean, we're getting a pretty intense recipe, are we not? But once the war was over, he took his wife and daughter and he moved to Burbank, California, which is a city north and a bit west of Los Angeles, but still very much a part of kind of that whole area. Edmund Jr. found work as an electrician and provided a pretty comfortable living for his wife and daughter. Edmund III was born in 1948, weighing 13 pounds at birth. From now on, just to try to save some confusion, I'm just going to call our Edmund simply Ed, as I have been. So Ed's mother, Clarnell, was constantly complaining to her husband, just bitching at him about his, quote, menial job as an electrician, that she had expected him to do better. She emasculated him, she belittled him regularly, and in front of his own children. She had always felt that she wanted this strong man physically and mentally, and while Edmund was physically strong, he just wasn't up to her constant tirades and fighting. He had learned from his own childhood that it was better to just be quiet, just endure it, it will end, right? 2 years after Ed, his little sister was born. And by the time Ed was 4 years old, he was already a head taller than all of his peers. But it's no wonder, as both of his parents were exceptionally tall themselves. Way above average for a man or a woman. Now, predictably, his parents' fighting continued to escalate. Many sources described it as stormy, but I don't think that word quite encompasses it. And when his mother hadn't gotten as much as she wanted out of his father before he gave up, she would then turn her attention to Ed and became quite overly critical of him. She called him stupid and slow, and he believed it. He stated that she belittled him and picked at him and talked mean to him from the moment he got up until the moment he went to bed. So naturally, he had a closer bond with his father, who treated him pretty fairly. And while in kindergarten, he acted out, he got into trouble on occasion, no doubt from the palpable tension in his home and how his mother treated him. Ed's father once said, quote, "Suicide missions in wartime and the later atomic bomb testings were nothing compared to living with Clarnell," end quote. And that she affected him as a grown man more than 396 days and nights of fighting on the front did. Oh my God, right? Ed himself stated, quote, "Very early, my natural parents were always loud and arguing, which terrified me emotionally of anything very loud and very pushy. As I was growing up, I shied away from loud noises and arguments," end quote. Well, me too, Ed. Me too. So according to EdmundKemperStories.com, Ed, quote, also said that when he was 8 or 9 years of age, the mother forced him to sell newspapers on the street, and that on one occasion, his father went out looking for his son after the mother told the boy not to return until he had sold all of his newspapers, end quote. So when Ed was 8 years old, his parents separated, later officially divorcing when Ed was in his early teens, and Clarnell took the children and moved back to Montana. Ed was devastated. He didn't want to move away from the home that he had always known, away from the father that was decent to him, his school, his friends, and especially didn't want to go to Montana and live with her. At this point, Clarnell was drinking heavily and the verbal abuse continued to escalate. Ed later stated that she used to smack him in the head frequently or take physical punishments entirely too far. Not surprisingly, right, Ed was becoming angry. So, at this tender young age of 8, he would escape these stressors by thinking, by being alone inside of his own head, where it was the safest place for him. Because he could do no right in the physical world, he could do so within his own mind. And he became interested in things that scared him, analyzing and thinking, and then graduating to fantasizing about hatred because he had no outlet. In his head, there wasn't anyone who told him that he was dumb, or lazy, or a freak, or worthless. He began developing fantasies about being the last person alive on Earth. And I have fond memories of those that I had myself at about his age. So he got the original idea from school. His teacher talked about it and how lonely children would feel. But Ed thought that it was an interesting concept, and that became the seed. Imagine it. Everyone is gone. There are no restrictions, no being yelled at or disciplined, and no belittling. And as he developed that fantasy more in his mind, he built up to people being just inanimate, unable to move, and how they couldn't hurt him or affect him. Then it went further and further, and at one point, he had made the statement to one of his sisters who had been, teasing him about a teacher that she perceived he had a crush on, that he'd have to kill the teacher to be able to kiss her. Now, what he meant was that she would have to be inanimate and therefore wouldn't react to him kissing her, if that makes sense. He wouldn't have to worry about her reaction. Of course, experts, and I'm saying that in air quotes, would later make this statement out to be way more than what it was. He was so shy that if he could guarantee that she would not have any negative reaction whatsoever, then he would give her a little innocent childhood kiss. That is as involved as that statement was. Experts like to read into shit more than they need to. Now, the house they lived in at the time had a basement with no windows, and Ed was, of course, terrified of the dark. And when it was time to go to bed, he watched his mother and his sisters go upstairs, while he was forced to go downstairs into this dark basement. In a prison interview, he plainly explained that, in his 8-year-old mind, his mother and sisters were going up to heaven, and he was being ordered down into hell.
My life had started going that way at about 8. We lived in a house where there was a basement. It was a walk-in basement, but it was in Montana. It was a full basement, hewn wood floorboards, and it looked like some old dungeon out of a castle or something. I was 8 years old, 7.5, 8 years old, and then I was very susceptible. My imagination was very livid. And there was an old furnace in the basement that had been converted from burning coal to burning gas. And it had a central heating system with your typical radiators. And if you've ever lived in a home like that, you know the binging, the clang, the pop, the rattles, the weird sounds in the night that can be spooky to a kid. Well, at a certain time of the evening, the family left the center room, the living room of the house. My mother and my sisters, or my sisters themselves, would go up to bed upstairs, where I used to go to bed, upstairs. I had to go down to the basement. And an 8-year-old child had a tough time differentiating the reason in that. Why am I going to the basement? I'm going to hell, they're going to heaven. Earth is the living room. I'm going down to deal with demons and monsters and ghosts and all the things that scare me. They don't have to.
Ed developed rituals to try to cope with his fears. You see, there were 2 lights in the basement. Once he got to the bottom of the stairs, he would reach out for the string to pull, and the light would come on, only illuminating a portion of the basement. He would look in all directions, terrified of what he couldn't see, then walk or run over to the corner of the basement where his bed was, I think it was more like a cot, reached out into the darkness, desperately grasping for the string for the light that he knew was there, and when his hand met the string, he would quickly pull it, and that light would come on. But then he knew he would have to go back and turn the first light off, or his mother would tear into him, so he would have to go back, turn it off, and, hog ass to bed. And as he lay there, trying to catch his breath and slow his pounding heart, calm his brain, choke down his fear, he listened to this sort of popping and hissing of this gas boiler thing in the basement, which did nothing to calm his nerves. When he would cry and tell his mother that he was scared of the dark basement and that he didn't want to sleep down there, she would hit him and tell him, well, just quit being scared. And during this, his mind began to fracture, ever so slightly. He later said he remembers wanting to kill her at 8 years old, and he meant it. And thankfully, at some point, somehow, Ed's father did find out that Clarnell had been abusing Ed and forcing him to sleep in that basement. His father later stated in an interview that he put a stop to that immediately and threatened her with the law. At least he had someone that was trying to advocate for him. Can't relate. To try to cope with his declining mental health, he developed games to play with his younger sister and sometimes a friend that would, come over to play as well. A couple of the games included rolling each other up in a rug and seeing who could escape the fastest. And the other was tying each other up in a chair and making it seem like it was an electric chair after they had watched a news program about a criminal being executed by electric chair. Side note, of course, so-called experts also love to state that this was some form of play that proves he would grow up to be a serial killer, when really this is just recreating something that they saw on television, and back then that would have been really shocking. It was using imitation during play, nothing more. Was it not a great ingredient? Of course, but again, experts make shit out to be more than it needs to be. Ed tells a story about how he was allowed to go visit his father in California once, and while he was there, his father had bought him a toy handgun. It hadn't been cheap, and Ed had treasured it. His younger sister had not been permitted to join Ed on this particular visit, and she was, of course, jealous. That's normal sibling stuff, right? I'd wager Ed went to spend time with his dad as a respite from his mother, and then also so that he could have, a boy have some guy time. But after Ed returned home, his sister was being sort of demanding of his attention, and Ed was playing with that toy gun. His sister grabbed it and chucked it across the room, and when Ed got up and went to pick it up, he realized that it was broken. He said the mechanism inside was broken and was not repairable. He was furious, of course, so he stomped into her room. He grabbed her most prized possession, which was a Barbie. He pulled the head off. He cut the hands off.
And that really outraged me. So I said, so you want to play like that, huh? So I go running into her room. She says, what are you doing? What are you doing? She's shrieking and chasing me, right? So I run into her room and I grab up her Barbie doll. It was the one fancy doll she had, the Barbie doll. Everybody has one, right? She had a pair of sewing scissors sitting there and a sewing machine, a sewing kit. I grabbed the scissors out. The head didn't decapitate, it pops off. So I popped that off. I said, well, that's going to go right back on. That's no damage. So I took the scissors and I cut the hands off the doll. I said, here, now you got a toy that doesn't work too good. I got a toy that doesn't work too good.
It is important to note that Ed himself doesn't think this particular incident is a puzzle piece that fits into the picture that made him a serial killer. He believes this was just intense sibling rivalry that is actually pretty common. If a sibling breaks a beloved toy, the other will break one of their favorite toys. And of course, he is absolutely correct. So Clarnell regularly smacked young Edward around. She hit him. She constantly talked about how horrible men were in front of him. Can relate. Ed stated that when she, quote, beat the hell out of him, she also demanded that he stop crying out in pain because the neighbors would think she was beating him. Of all things. And that's funny to me because mine used to say, keep on screaming, it just makes me want to hit you more. I mean, the memories. Ed would walk around with big red welts on his body from her abuse. Same. He simply didn't fit the mold of the child that she wanted, and she certainly didn't act like she wanted him, full stop. And she regularly abused him for his mere existence, at times. And he began to think about how he would love to kill his mother. But that's not to say that he didn't know something inside of him was unraveling and coming apart. At just 10 years old, Ed buried the family cat alive. And this is where we now have crossed over. Once he knew it was dead, he exhumed it, decapitated it, and put its head on a stick. At some point, his mother moved him and his sisters again to a new place in Montana, thus having to start completely over at a new school. Now, he hadn't ever really been great at making friends anyway, but this move ensured that he wouldn't try ever again. The other boys at school bullied him mercilessly, and he was fearful of getting into physical fights with them, although he was so much bigger than they were. And it is likely the boys picked on him because he was such a big kid. But regardless, the stress of this and his mother's constant mental and physical abuse towards him was becoming more than he could handle. His mother remarried quickly to a man named Norman Turnquist in 1962, and Ed's stepfather did make an attempt to bond with the young man, surprisingly. He allegedly took Ed on fishing trips, he taught him how to hunt, the rite of passage into being a man, especially back in those days. But the couple turned around and got divorced the next year, citing extreme cruelty. Funny that, because that was what the grounds for divorce were against Edmund II, Ed's dad, extreme cruelty. Ed stated that he would sit and watch his mother, quote, field strip grown men in these intense, emotional contests of when they would become so angry that they'd be obviously trying to restrain themselves, and she would berate them with taunts of smacking women around. Oh, you gonna hit me? Oh, you want to hit me? And Edmund would watch these men get seriously angry, punching walls and whatnot, stomping around, but never a hand on his mom. And this is how she treated men, guys, period. My own mother was no better, telling me my entire life that all men are liars and cheaters when she herself were both of these things, constantly, continuously, at the same time. And Clarnell had done this to Ed's father until they separated, and not having his father around to treat like absolute shit, well, she spewed her toxic hatred at her own son, full volume. But Ed himself would watch her do this to men and stated he would be both horrified and also fascinated simultaneously. So when he was 13, Clarnell, complaining about what a horrible kid he was and reminding him that she had been forced to lock him in the basement to keep him from sexually assaulting his sisters, although that would have never happened, finally sent him to visit his father in Los Angeles, and Ed was thrilled to go. He hated Montana and desperately wanted to be away from his mother, and while he was there, he and his stepbrother, as his father had remarried by this point, hung out together, and they managed to get along fairly well at that time. Ed stated that his father treated him fairly, like a, quote, little man, the way his father wished he had been treated by his own mother, Maud. And Ed felt like he could relax a bit and that maybe he wasn't such an awkward youth after all. But like all good things, right, it came to an end. He was gone for 1 month only, and when he got back, his mother immediately picked up on the fact that he was a bit happier for being there with his father. I mean, she couldn't have that. She quickly fell back into her mind games, and one such game would be to make these strange threats, such as saying that she was going to beat him after he finished his dinner, so he'd be forced to sit there and think about it and stress about it during dinner. In his preteen years, he was growing so rapidly, and his mother used that as ammunition as well, calling him a freak. By the time he was 14 years old, he was already well over 6 feet tall. At this point, he was having disturbing and dark fantasies about death, He picked back up on his habit of killing small animals. Ed thought so little of himself that he would play games like lying in the street, waiting for a car to run him over, which of course never happened. He said every time he did that, the car would stop and the person would get out very worried about why he was lying there. But he would stand and run away. Finally, his mother sent him to live with his father again, much to Ed's delight. He was thrilled to get away from his mother, and as he started yet another new school, he unfortunately fell into old habits. He had always thought that he was dumb because she called him stupid and slow. He had no faith in himself and stated he was not even a thinker at the time, that he was basically just on autopilot until one day an art teacher in the 9th grade took an interest in him and decided to pull the guarded and withdrawn teen out of his shell.
I always thought I was a little missing up here, a little short. Because I was always called stupid, I was called slow, don't you think when you do things? That was the problem. I wasn't thinking when I did things. And I had absolutely no faith in myself at all. I had no interaction going on in my own mind. I was not a thinker. I was not an individual. I had a teacher in the 9th grade who changed all that. He made me think. He would not tolerate my not thinking. He was an art teacher. And it was a devastating experience for me because there were gears in my head that were just rusty and they were barely moving or not at all. And that's when I found out that's what the state of my mind's functioning was. I didn't think. To the point of he points at a stapler on his desk and says, "What does that say?" And I looked at it and I said, "Silver line." He says, "Look again." And he's raving at me. And I look and it said swing line. All I had to do was look at it and read it. But I glanced at it and threw it back at him out of panic. So he made me think. And he gave me puzzles to work out in school in my class where I had to resolve these to continue on with the class. I had to think. I had to use abstracts. And after that started, that became fascinating to me, so I got more and more involved in thinking.
He forced him to come out of his mind and fully pay attention. He gave him puzzles to think about and resolve during class. And those are the very things that I'm doing for the inmates that I have group therapy with. I can't have physical puzzles, but word finds, Sudoku, number finds, crosswords, even coloring pages, whatever it takes. But at home, he was beginning to get into arguments with his stepbrother. His father had a new family now, and Ed was feeling like that it was a competition to get his father's attention. He simply felt that he was in the way. He felt unwanted. So for the holidays, this is going to be great, Ed's father and the family took a trip up to visit Ed's grandparents. Now, Maud and Edmund Sr. lived on an isolated farm in North Fork, California. At that time, Maud, then 66 years old, was writing children's stories as well as still painting. Maud would often paint outside, enjoying the serene views that surrounded their farm. She appreciated its isolation that let her work in peace and without disturbances. So there I'm also seeing a bit of perhaps a neurodivergency. Now, once Christmas was over, suddenly Ed was told he would be staying with his grandparents, that he would not be returning home with his father. Ed stated that he felt like his father abandoned him, and that affected him deeply. Trauma after trauma and abandonment issues to boot. Now, Maud noticed that her grandson was sullen, in quotes, and she also knew how much he wanted to go back to live with his father, so she told him that if he ever wanted that to happen, well, he'd better do exactly what she said. Edmund stated that it was okay at first. Things were calm. After all, he wasn't in Montana with his mother and so forth, and a reprieve from Clarnell was certainly a blessing. But as the months went on, his grandmother's decision to try to help, air quotes, him, was by completely bombarding him with psychological games where no matter what he did, it was the wrong thing. And it was having a negative effect on him that was again accumulating. I mean, that's gaslighting 101. He had successfully escaped his overbearing mother just to be forced to live with another woman who was nearly as bad. And she would not let him out of her sight, even to hang out with the kids his own age locally, and he was nearing 15 years old at this time. He wasn't even allowed to leave the property. So, with no real socialization, no normal teen activities, out in a rural area with nothing to do, Ed would just recede into his mind again. It was a safe place. And Maud would notice him staring off into space, lost in his thoughts, and would become angry and accuse him of doing it on purpose to scare her, which sounds more like she couldn't just leave him alone, like she had perhaps a bit of flavors of a personality disorder. And so the tension built, and the fantasies that he had had about killing his mother had now changed over to his grandmother. 15-year-old Ed could feel himself get to that breaking point. And on August 27th, 1964, while his grandmother sat at the dining room table writing, after they'd had kind of a big row, he grabbed his rifle, he walked up behind her and shot her in the head. She was dead instantly, but he shot 2 more times into her back. He then wrapped her head in a towel and dragged her body into the bedroom. Not long after, his grandfather returned to the farm from getting groceries that he had bought in town. He got out of his truck, he went to the back to begin unloading the bags, and Ed shot him in the back of the head. And this is kind of how Ed described that exact moment. He said,
And then a month later, I'm up living with my grandparents in the mountains, and 10 months later, I murdered them. And I sensed everybody in the world just stopping what they were doing, turning around, saw what I did, and are coming to get me. And I knew I was paranoid at that moment. I knew anybody that came up there and gave me a funny look or a fishy eye or quizzical look, I'd have blown their brains out thinking they were coming to get me. I felt my back hit that wall. I was the rabbit that always ran, that always backed away, always burned his bridges. And suddenly there weren't any more. And my back hit that wall, and I came out screaming and kicking and shooting.
And when he finally calmed down a bit and fully realized what he had done, he called his mother in Montana to tell her what he had done. Fascinating, right? She told him to call the local sheriff's department. Well, the sheriff's department came, they took him in, they questioned him, and he immediately confessed to the murders. He told them about his grandmother and how he had begun to have thoughts of killing her a lot recently, but that killing his grandfather had been an act of mercy, that he hadn't wanted to have the pain. He didn't want his grandfather really to know the pain of the fact that his own grandson had killed his wife. Ed was kept in the local jail while his mental health was being assessed, and a court-appointed psychiatrist diagnosed him with paranoid psychopathy, and the youth authority committed him to Atascadero State Hospital. I really should cover some of these state hospitals, shouldn't I? So paranoid psychopathy, which they diagnosed him with, is now known as paranoid personality disorder, which displays as a long-term pattern of distrust and suspicion of others without adequate reason to be suspicious, which is basically paranoia. People with PPD often believe that others are trying to demean, to harm, or threaten them. People with paranoid personality disorder often don't think their behavior and way of thinking are particularly problematic. PPD is one of a group of conditions in the Cluster A, or eccentric personality disorders. People with these disorders have unusual and eccentric thinking or behavior. Other Cluster A personality disorders include schizoid personality disorder, so kind of think Jeffrey Dahmer, schizotypal personality disorder, think like Vincent van Gogh or maybe Kramer from Seinfeld, just as a point of reference. So leave me a comment and let me know if you think his diagnosis of paranoid personality disorder would be accurate for him at 15 years old, under the very conditions that you know he lived in his entire life up to this point. Please leave me a comment. Let me know if you agree with it. I love to hear your thoughts. So at Atascadero Hospital, from the beginning, the doctors were impressed with the teen who was eager to participate. And it's no wonder, since he was in a safe place and a positive environment. Ed happily subjected himself to the battery of tests that the staff conducted on him, and an IQ test revealed his to be 145, considered to be high gifted to genius level. That score represents roughly the top 0.1% to 0.2% of the total population. This level indicates extraordinary cognitive, logical reasoning, and pattern recognition abilities, meaning they can grasp complex concepts rapidly and solve novel problems with ease. But a super high IQ in and of itself comes with complications. But Ed hadn't even realized just how incredibly intelligent that he truly was until he was in that hospital. Can you imagine what that must have felt like? The realization that he was actually basically a genius who had just never been in an environment healthy enough to give him the peace to blossom and bloom his own mind. When you are in perpetual survival mode, you get stunted. The doctors and staff were so impressed with him that they allowed him to help them administer tests to some of the other patients. Now wrap your mind around that. What an incredible education he got in what kinds of questions were on these tests, what answers or combinations of answers the doctors were looking for, and how to interpret that data. He learned quickly exactly what they were looking for in his behavior and mental health. So Ed, a teenager, also had time to get to know other, much older male patients that were there because they were dangerous sex offenders who would regale their tales of what it was like to hard R-word a woman and the high they got from the control and distress. Now, being that Ed was getting into his mid and later teens, he was becoming very sexually aware. These stories left an impression on his rapidly maturing mind. There was no chillin' with these guys, swapping stories about what chick that they had made out with, what they had done to them. He went from 0 to a bazillion just coming out of puberty because of what he was listening to from these men. And he was also growing still taller. He finally reached a whopping, get this, 6 feet 9 inches tall, or 2.06 meters. He kept his appearance up. He was clean cut. He displayed conservative views, again, extremely intelligent, but very sheltered, naive, and working through a lot of early life trauma. And that's even if he was willing to disclose enough for the doctors to help him. And once the hospital decided that he was well, I'm saying that in air quotes, they discharged him at 21 years old in 1969. And so, that was Edmund's childhood. There is just so much to work with here that the only place to start is at the beginning. And we're 45 minutes in, my guys. You are so welcome. It's because I love you. Now, we've spoken before about whether or not mental illness can be inherited. The National Institutes of Health states that a new study shows major mental disorders once thought to be distinct actually share genetic sort of glitches. Now, science has known for a long time that a lot of mental health issues seem to run in families which point at possible inherited genes. Usually, if a mental disorder were to be inherited, it would be generally the same mental disorder the previous member of the family had, or at least in the same family, so to speak. Okay, so the genes might be there, but they might not be triggered until a trauma is experienced. Also, as you probably already know, I am a huge fan of Dr. James Fallon and his work. And if you are really interested in the in-depth studies of brain differences and psychopaths and whatever, all of that, I highly recommend him. But one thing he talks about is the major violence genes, and importantly, a variant of these genes that is in a percentage of the human population. It resides on the X chromosome, meaning it is only inherited from the mother. So think about it like this. Daughters will have XX chromosomes, so they have the extra X to sort of dilute the violent X, like the warrior gene, right? But for boys, the other chromosome is the Y. So they get a super dose of this variant violence sitting on the X chromosome situation. And Dr. Fallon called it the warrior gene. This is why most serial killers or these really dangerous people are in fact male. So that's just a biological thing. I know, it's fascinating. Now, we'll come back to all that later, of course, but what do we have so far? Ed was born to a mother who was a highly intelligent and very motivated woman, but used negative and aggressive and violent behaviors, obviously, to assert her control. It must have been a successful behavior during her life because she continued to use these negative and aggressive behaviors and tactics to her advantage until Ed's father had had enough and the marriage ended. Ed himself stated more than once that she asserted her dominance through very passive-aggressive as well as physically aggressive behaviors at him from as far back as he could remember. And sidebar, the jingling in the background is Monty. Yes, he's sitting here with me. He's my co-host. So children get their personal self-esteem, their sense of self-worth, and who we really are through their caregivers, most usually parents. The old saying, nature versus nurture, is valid in that some of our personalities and things that make us individuals come from the genes we inherited from our family. But the nurture aspect is so very important. How a child is treated and disciplined and loved can mold what is already naturally there in many different forms or directions. It can make a child with a firm foundation in some point and make them lean terribly. We're talking Michael Jackson style, in a bad way or even a good way. Ed's mother seemed to delight in belittling her son, berating, making him feel worthless, unloved, and empty. Any thought or notion that he had was immediately cut off, which is why he unplugged from the outside world and began living in his own head. Belittling a child can make the child feel extremely lonely, and they withdraw into their own despair. Belittling often is just the symptom of full psychological and emotional abuse, which includes the following bullet points. Okay, humiliating or constantly criticizing a child, threatening, shouting at a child or calling them names, making the child the subject of jokes or using sarcasm to hurt a child, blaming and scapegoating, not recognizing a child's own individuality or trying to control their lives, pushing a child too hard or not recognizing their limitations, exposing a child to upsetting events or situations like domestic abuse or drug taking or alcoholism, failing to promote a child's social development, not allowing them to have friends, persistently ignoring them, being absent, manipulating the child, never saying anything kind, expressing positive feelings, or congratulating a child on successes, and never showing any emotions and interactions with a child, also known as emotional neglect. Okay? My relationship as far as how my own mother treated me ticks more of those bullet points than you can imagine, but not all. So which one of those can we say Clarnell didn't do to Ed, though? Correct, she ticks every single one of those bullet points. So that naturally leads us to children who are being emotionally abused might, more bullet points, seem unconfident or lack self-assurance, struggle to control their emotions, having difficulty making or maintaining relationships, and act in a way that's inappropriate for their age. So did Ed display any of these behaviors? Yes, he most certainly did. So then we throw in the physical abuse that he endured from his mother, and, well, we know what that outcome was. Then we have his experience in the basement, his analogy of him having to go down to hell while his mother and his sisters went up to heaven is actually a really excellent way to view it. As if the emotional and physical abuse weren't enough, she then completely cut him off from his family and forced him to sleep down there, knowing he was terrified. And her response to him, telling her, trying to communicate with her how scared he really was, literally hitting him and telling him to just quit being scared. And even though the thought never crossed his mind, she told him the reason he had to sleep down there was because she was afraid he would sexually assault his own sisters. Now keep in mind, he was just 8 years old during this time. He has obviously never shown any signs or made any comments about his sisters. It's just her fear was completely ridiculous. But then again, it's that sort of paranoia, a little kind of delusional, that gets us to the next point, right? So I've said this before, I'll say it again. It's not my place to really officially diagnose anyone with anything. I am finishing my master's. I will have my license soon enough, and then I will literally be qualified to do so. So I'm saying this with a high degree of confidence. Okay? This is coming from my opinion based on the education I've pursued for 35 years, basically, along with publicly available information that I've researched. And with that, I feel that Clarnell could very well have suffered with borderline personality disorder. Let's go ahead and have the sidebar right now. Every time I talk about BPD, people come out of the woodwork to scold me about how I have no concept of what borderline personality disorder is, and oh yeah, we're the evil ones, and they get really bent out of shape about it. As I said in the previous podcast, give me some credit that I understand that the emotional roller coaster, the cycling, the fear of abandonment, and all of these things are trauma-based, and they exist on a spectrum, as most things do. Okay? When I'm talking about Clarnell, I'm talking about an extreme case with no diagnoses, no self-awareness, no idea that that's what's going on, no guidance, nothing. Okay? And she's an extreme case. I'm not talking about you. Okay? I was raised by a borderline. I know what I'm talking about. Calm down. So the Crime Piper blog post states, quote, "Where did the paranoia she harbored that Kemper would molest his sisters stem from?" End quote. The site states that Clarnell has been used as an example of the witch queen type in many articles and books written about Ed and his situation. So what does that look like? Now, I'm not saying that this is DSM-5, -TR information here, but this is sort of all of the practitioners kind of agree with these subcategories as a way to try to describe the different ways that borderline manifests. Okay, there's 4 types of borderline mothers: the witch, the hermit, the waif, and the queen. So the witch mother is consumed by self-hatred, most often subconsciously, and displays extreme hostility and cruelty towards her children. When her feelings of rage are mixed with impotence, they have a tendency to be quite cruel to those who are less powerful than they are, physically or mentally, or both. They are usually self-obsessed and have little to no concern for others and their feelings. They do not take any form of criticism well at all, and their need for ultimate power and control stems from their own insecurities and fear of abandonment. This particular group, it has been said, is very resistant to treatment, as they won't allow anyone to try and help them. I believe my mother resides pretty firmly in this category. So the effects on their children are that they often find themselves the target of cruel attacks. They assume that they are, in fact, the ones at fault. They are depressed, they feel shame, they are insecure, and, like myself, hypervigilant or always on red alert and dissociative. They have difficulties forming and maintaining relationships. Some can go on to develop PTSD and could suffer with borderline personality disorder themselves, which, thank fuck, I do not. The hermit mother sees the world as a very dangerous place and is self-serving and quite callous. They're always awaiting some, perceived impending doom, have deep inner shame, which is projected outwardly. They put on this tough outer shell and project this superficial image of independence and confidence, but in reality are prone to rage and are insecure. So the children of these mothers, in turn, find it difficult to learn appropriate coping skills for a wide variety of life's problems. The waif mother portrays a sense of helplessness, hopelessness, feeling deep despair, having extremely low self-esteem, and having an overall victim mentality. They see themselves as a failure and, in turn, might treat her children both indulgently and then negligently. There is usually an undercurrent of rage which could erupt if she begins to feel abandoned. The children of the waif mother feel like they are failures because they can never make her happy. They might also share her negative worldview and can sometimes find it difficult to separate from the mother. And then we finally have the queen type BPT mother. This mother craves constant attention. She uses her children to fulfill her own needs. She will not tolerate disagreement or criticism from her children, and doing so just proves to her that her children must not love and respect her. She has deep feelings of sadness and emptiness and seem to not be able to self-soothe. They have a powerful sense of entitlement and are known to use even blackmail to get what they want. She is cunning in that she will plan premeditated manipulation, which I also think my mother does. The queen's mood will saturate the atmosphere of the whole house, and everyone is expected to bend and mold themselves according to her mood. And if people do not comply, she will use devaluation to shame them into compliance. She needs constant control over her children, regardless of her children's feelings. I mean, yes, I felt that too. So these children harbor deep confusion and anger. They also sometimes long for approval, recognition, and unconditional love. So children subjected to this kind of parenting will usually display one of the three coping mechanisms: fight, flight, or freeze. It would seem that throughout Ed's childhood, he was stuck in the freeze. So when Ed was finally able to escape his mother and live with his father, he felt he was in competition with his father's new wife and children. So in a sense, he felt rejected by his father, who then promptly abandoned him with his grandparents, and namely Maud, his grandmother, whose personality wasn't as negative as Clarnell's, I think, anyway, but a very strong and domineering personality nonetheless. Clarnell and Maud both had issues with feeling like they had to constantly be in control. Now, I don't think any one of us are confused as to why Ed eventually snapped. Not being able to handle his hypercritical and abusive mother or cope with the stress and tension, he took his frustrations and violent fantasies out on small animals. Unfortunately, he cracked. He fantasized about violence and people being inanimate objects so that he wouldn't have to deal with their reactions, since most of what he experienced was negative. And then as he got older, as he went through puberty, things got real intense, real negative, real fast. So with all of these ingredients, it comes as no surprise that he snapped and that he had a break from reality. So getting back into his life story. Ed was released from the state hospital in 1969, and I'm sure we are all quite familiar with what was going on in California and much of the country really during that time. He walked out at 21 years old with his perfect high and tight haircut, his perfectly manicured mustache, pressed clothing, state-issued glasses, looking like what they called back then a square.
But it was trying to fill in the blanks of 5.5 years of not being in society. I missed that flower child generation. I missed the entry into Vietnam, all that stuff. I missed 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. I'm supposed to be associating with people in their adult years, but I missed a big chunk, so I'm out there trying to fill in the gaps. Find out why these kids are the way they are now, because they were totally different from the kids that I was when I was that age. Totally different.
He would have stuck out like a sore thumb for sure when everyone else was wearing furs and bell-bottoms and platforms and a flower in your hair, bathing sometimes if they felt like it. So the whole time he had been in Atascadero, they had told him that he needed to not have anything to do with his mother, that she had, as Ed put it, gotten her pound of flesh out of him, is what he said. They pounded into his head that their relationship was toxic, and I think we would all agree. He needed to go zero contact. Then when it was time for him to leave, they paroled him to none other than his mother.
He was released to the one person that authorities at the state mental hospital recommended he never see again.
I got paroled to my mother. Atascadero decided that I didn't never need to talk to her again at all. Don't give her a Christmas present. Leave her alone. She got her pound of flesh out of you. I wasn't sniveling about my mother to them. I didn't like to hear what they had to say about her. 4 months after I was out, I was back into the fantasy bag.
But he also managed to get his records sealed. See? So Ed said that it was all of 4 months after his release that he was back into the dark fantasy life in his mind. He did try to date, but he'd been in a state hospital since he was 15, and he lacked the naturally progressing social skills to be successful in his dating career.
My first date was an absolute disaster. Wasn't her fault. You know? And I didn't blame her even then. I'm saying it was a terrible tragedy, but boy, she didn't ever talk to me again. It was awful. It wasn't sexual or grabbing at her or nothing. I was just such a dork, taking her to a John Wayne movie and Denny's. It's terrible. I'd never been on a date. At 16, that was cool, you know? I'd never been on a date, you know? I was locked up since I was 15. But I can't tell her that. Oh, gee, you don't mind me. You know, she kind of got hung up on my looks or whatever. You know, I mean, she's a gorgeous young lady. Pure class, and she saw something there that I guess wasn't there, and boy, she found out quick.
I know that he did have a fiance for a short time, but that was towards the end of all of this. So his mother had already been through yet another husband, and her drinking had increased while he was away. It did not take long for the arguing to resume. They often had verbal altercations, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. Kemper later stated, quote, "My mother and I started right in on horrendous battles, just horrible battles, violent and vicious. I've never been in such a vicious verbal battle with anyone. It would go to fifths with a man, but this was my mother, and I couldn't stand the thought of my mother and I doing these things. She insisted on it, and just over stupid things. I remember one roof raiser was over whether I should have my teeth cleaned." End quote. So Ed went about deciding on a career and thought about becoming a police officer at first, but apparently there's a height restriction. He was simply too tall. He had begun going to a community college under the supervision of the youth authority, and he was doing quite well. He bought a motorcycle so he could at least feel like a policeman. His doctors reported that he was adjusting to life outside the hospital very well, and when his mother stated she was moving to Santa Cruz to start an administrative assistant job at the university there, they advised him not to go with her, but the youth authority again forced him to go. So the doctors said, absolutely not, and then the, government and so on says, bye-bye, go with your mom. After getting a good job working for the highway department, he was able to afford an apartment with a roommate. I don't know anything about the roommate. He began having drinks at a bar where local police officers went and chatted with them. They liked him. They called him Big Ed. Now, riding his motorcycle around, he was hit by a car twice. The last time he walked away with a broken arm and was given a settlement. With that money, he bought a white 1969 Ford Galaxy and found that he absolutely loved to drive around. Keep in mind, 1969, that car was maybe at this point a year old. So it was a brand new car. So he loved driving around, and while doing so, he also became aware of how many girls were around hitchhiking.
I think you traveled quite a lot on the freeways at night or picking up hitchhikers.
During the day.
During the day.
Yeah, I traveled a lot because I'd been locked up for 5.5 years. So I was free. The driving around was a way to exhibit that freedom, to demonstrate it, to get the cobwebs out of me. When I first got out, I loved to drive. And I got out, got a license, and I just started driving. And that was my main hobby, I'd say. And I saw a lot of people out hitchhiking. And I didn't select girls to pick up. I picked up anybody who wanted a ride. And over that whole 3-year period, it was the same way. If someone needed a ride, I picked them up. Unless specifically I was looking for someone to do in.
And at first he thought it would be a great way to get to know people and genuinely enjoyed picking them up and giving them a ride. No harm, no foul. Social experiment, he's learning as he goes. What he was also doing, though, was watching their reactions to him and learning to mold and shape his behavior to make girls trust him more. He was beginning to learn how to wear the mask that we call in the neurodivergent world. This, coupled with the still constant fighting with his mother, who called him or even showed up to his apartment, well, the violence in his mind was becoming so overpowering that it threatened to spill out into reality yet again.
And this craving, this awful, raging, eating feeling inside. I could feel it consuming my insides. This fantastic passion. It was overwhelming me. It was like drugs. It was like alcohol. A little isn't enough. At first it is. And as you adjust to that psychologically and physically, you take more and more and more. It's the same process. So it finally came down to the thing of, do I dare bring this gun out? Already realizing if that gun comes out, something has to happen. It was going to happen. I didn't see it then, but it was going to happen. I was playing a dangerous game with a loaded gun that got us all.
He made the passenger side door of his car to where it couldn't be opened from the inside. He began stashing items inside of it, such as knives, guns, trash bags, and so forth in the trunk, a little kill kit, if you will. But once everything was in order, he was ready and knew exactly what was about to happen. On May 7th, 1972, he was driving around Berkeley when he saw 18-year-old students Mary Ann and Anita hitchhiking. He pulled over, and they stated they needed to go to Stanford, so Ed agreed to take them. He drove for a bit, but decided on a remote area outside of the city, and the girls became frightened. His intention was to assault them, of course, but he had been taught at the hospital that it was best to not leave any witnesses. You have to remember that he learned quite a bit from his little stay with the doctors at Atascadero. And so he handcuffed Mary Ann. He apologized for accidentally brushing his hand against one of her breasts. He then locked Anita in the trunk. He then went back to the inside of the car, stabbed and strangled Mary Ann. And once she was gone, he returned to the trunk and he killed Anita the same way. He then put Mary Ann's body in the trunk with Anita's, took them back to his apartment, and while his roommate wasn't home, he took the bodies inside, he photographed them naked, then proceeded to have intercourse with the remains. And once he was finished, he dismembered the girls, putting the pieces into trash bags, violated the severed heads, then disposed of everything near Loma Prieta Mountain. So 4 months later, Ed picked up 15-year-old Aiko, who needed a ride to a dance studio because she had missed the bus. He again drove out into a secluded area and pulled a gun on the girl, but he got out of the car and managed to lock himself out. And yet, he also managed, to talk this girl into letting him back into the car. He then immediately strangled her until she was unconscious. He then assaulted her, and then he killed her, placed her body in his trunk, stopped off at a bar to have a drink, then went back outside, opened the trunk, and apparently stood there admiring his kill like a real hunter might. He then took her back to his apartment and did the same with her that he had done with the first two, disposing of the bags containing her remains out in the wilderness. So his first kills were in May, and then his second kills were 4 months later. We're talking September. And then in January 7th of 1973, so he's, on pace, definitely serial killer. Ed and his mother had gotten into it badly that day. The day being January 7th of 73. He had been forced to move back in with his mother. They got into this big fight, so he got into his car to go search for a victim. As he was driving around a college, he picked up 18-year-old Cynthia, drove to a secluded area, shot her, then took the body to he and his mother's apartment, where he stashed the remains in his closet overnight. And once Clarnell left the next morning for work, he took advantage of his alone time with the remains, it in his mother's bathtub, and got rid of the remains, save her head. He continued to, let's say, use the head for a few days before burying it in his mother's backyard, the face facing upward toward his mother's window. He would later say he did this because Clarnell always loved people to look up to her. Cynthia's remains would thankfully be found. You see, the actual murdering of the girl was not pleasant for Edmund. He struggled with knowing that they would suffer, at least for some small amount of time, and he didn't really want that at all. His intended result was to be able to own the body once she was already gone, evicting someone from their body. But then also, what I think he might not have been aware of, based on his own kind of introspection, is that he's still murdering a female because he's so angry with his mother. So nearly exactly a month later, after yet another fantastically horrible argument with his mother, Ed went on the hunt. The authorities had begun to warn people that there might be a serial killer on the loose, though that specific term was brand new, and told people to either not hitchhike at all or only get in with people that had a school parking sticker on their car. Well, guess what Ed had, because his mother worked at a university. Now, he stated that if a girl got in with him and started talking about the murderer that was on the loose, well, she was getting a safe and free ride to wherever she wanted to go. He said he wouldn't touch a girl that talked to him about that.
My mother worked at the campus, and I had an A sticker on my car, and obvious access day or night to the campus. I was picking up some very lovely young women. You know what we were talking about as we're driving around? Almost as often as not, this guy that's going around doing this stuff. And the second they started talking that, they didn't realize it, but they were getting a free ride. I couldn't touch that with a 10-foot pole, I swear.
So how come they get in a car with somebody at that time?
She judged me not to be that guy. I didn't look like it.
But on February 5th, he picked up 2 girls, so we're talking 1 month now. So it's escalating. He picked up 2 girls, Rosalind and Allison. He then got them away from the public, shot both of them, and wrapped their bodies in blankets. He then did the exact thing to them that he had done to the previous ones. Finally, after this, Ed had had enough. He knew the murdering had to stop. He knew just who he was killing over and over, and he made the decision to destroy the root of the problem. So on April 30th, 1973, Ed was sleeping when Clarnell got home from a party she had attended, and she had been drinking. I mean, as she always did.
It was springtime. It was April. And for 2 months I hadn't killed. And I said, it's not going to happen to any more girls. It's got to stay between me and my mother, and I can't get away from her. We're still fighting. She's still belittling me. I'm like a puppet on a string, and I entertain her. She knows all my buttons.
And while lounging in bed, reading a book, she noticed Ed standing in the doorway, was instantly irritated. I mean, you can just almost see her like sighing, rolling her eyes, flopping her book down on her lap, making that noise.
And that's when I decided I'm going to murder my mother. I knew a week before she died I was going to kill her. And she went out to a party, she got soused, she came home, went to sleep. I was woken up by that, came out. I walked up to her bed. She's laying there reading a paperback. As many thousands of nights before. And she said, oh, I suppose you're going to want to sit up all night and talk now. Shit. And I looked at her, I said, no. I said, good night. And I knew I was going to kill her, you know?
And she said, quote, oh, I suppose you're going to want to sit up and talk all night now, end quote. Ed told her no and exited the room and waited for her to fall asleep. But he got up, he picked up a claw hammer, he bludgeoned his mother to death.
And in a rage, I went right back in. For 7 years, she said, I haven't had sex with a man because of you, my murderous son. It was one of our arguments. And I cut off her head, and I humiliated her corpse. I said, there, you know?
He then slit her throat, and she had told him recently that she hadn't had sex with a man for years because of her murderous son. So he decided to decapitate her, humiliate her in the worst way, and said, quote, there. He then took out her vocal cords and ground them up in the garbage disposal in an act of finally being able to shut her the fuck up.
A 6 young woman dead because of the way she raises her son and the way her son is raised, the way he grows up. And what's her closing words? I suppose you want to sit up all night and talk. God, I wish I had.
He played darts with her head that he placed on a shelf, then hid the remains in the closet. And after leaving to have a few drinks, later that day, he invited his mother's friend Sarah over for dinner and a movie with him and his mother. She agreed, and after she showed up, Ed strangled her, decapitated her, had his way with her body. He then stashed her body in the closet, wrote a note for the police, and fled. The note read, quote, approximately 5:15 a.m. Saturday. No need for her to suffer any more at the hands of this horrible, murderous butcher. It was quick, asleep, the way I wanted it, not sloppy and incomplete, gents. Just a lack of time. I got things to do. 3 exclamation points. End quote. Ed then got into his car and drove straight to Pueblo, Colorado, where he stopped. He called the police at a payphone, and he confessed to his murders. They didn't believe him at first. He had to convince them. He then patiently waited for the local police to find him at the payphone. They picked him up. They sent him back to California. When they asked him why he had turned himself in, he described being done with it all, that his motivation after his mother's death was gone, and that he was tired. No more girls needed to die. He gave a detailed confession and showed investigators where they could find the remains. Okay, so court-appointed psychiatrist deemed him sane. Ed had said he cannibalized the leg muscle of one of his victims while under the influence of a, quote, truth serum, but he has maintained that he actually did not eat any remains, that was not true. On November 8th, 1973, the jury found him guilty on all counts. He did ask for the death penalty, but by then California had abolished it. He has been in prison ever since and is still alive to this day, to this recording in 2026. He has always been a model prisoner. He skips parole hearings because he does not want to leave the prison. He has recorded himself reading books to make audiobooks for the blind.
Books on the tape for the blind. I participated in that program for the last 14 years.
What have been your favorite readings?
Sometimes children's books, some more complex children's books like White's Charlotte's Web, Stuart Little, Trumpet of the Swan, which were amazingly complex and before their times.
The day we visited, mass murderer Ed Kemper was transcribing Star Wars.
Reaching for the internal controls. 3PO was shocked. Behave yourself, R2. He finally chastised his companion. You're going to get us into trouble.
I actually wish I knew where I could find these audiobooks. I mean, I'd love to hear them, but I also hear that the prison won't release them because they understand that that's going to cause a whole thing, and you don't want to make a serial killer a celebrity, and I get that. And you can hear little excerpts of a couple of them where he's read The Wizard of Oz or Star Wars, I believe, but like the full catalog, can't get it. He had a stroke in 2015. He stopped all of his activities. He has agreed to many, many interviews over the years and has always been cooperative, upfront, and honest about his crimes. Now, I fully believe if he had been able to get away from the domineering and cruel, very abusive mother that he had at a very early age, well, he might not have committed these crimes. And even though he did grotesque and disgusting things with the bodies of his victims, which obviously we are not cool with, I still have always just sort of had an understanding when it comes to Ed because of shared mother trauma. But again, I want to reiterate, clearly I'm not okay with him harming anyone, okay? In my older intro to the podcast, it was Edmund Kemper who said,
My mother was a sick, angry, hungry, and very sad woman. I hated her, but I wanted to love my mother.
all three of the voices say something that is deeply personal to me.
And had a very strong and violently outspoken position on men for much of my upbringing.
Regardless, when you have a child with what I think was a genetic propensity for mental illness, and you stick him with a person who raises him in the horribly abusive way that she did, combined with the abandonment that he felt from his father, and then a sprinkling of personality disorder, lack of coping skills, lack of communication, lack of therapy, the list is on and on and on. It's no surprise to me that he did some of the things that he did. And I truly wish that he hadn't, because nearly all murders aside, he is a fascinating person to listen to. He was so highly intelligent, and I just feel he could have really done something with himself. But again, he absolutely did horrific, horrific things to his victims, and we do not ever want to lose sight of that, because they suffered and their families suffered, and it is about the victims. Would they have been victims if he had not been treated the way he did all of his life? I am, as a betting woman, thinking no. I don't think he would have murdered anyone. I think he would have had some social awkwardness, because I truly feel that he's on the autism spectrum as well. But I just don't think it would have escalated to any kind of violence where anyone would have been harmed. But what I would love to know is what you think about it. What do you think? I think that both men and women are walking around with a whole lot of trauma that they don't know what to do with, and they're not getting help that they need because there's still sort of a stigma, especially now because we have youngsters on the social media apps that are trading diagnoses back and forth like magic cards. And that shit's not funny. It's not cute to those of us who actually have very serious things going on due to trauma that you could never possibly process or endure. But those of us who did endure and we're still here and we're suffering, we need to do better. We need to call out the men and the women who are so toxic and predatory and dangerous and hold them accountable. One of my favorite examples, and I know I'm probably going to get canceled for this. Are people still getting canceled? I mean, I don't really care. But anyway, one of the examples is that a man roofing a woman to do what have you with her whatnots and unmentionables is horrific. It's awful. We women are seeing these things on internet, and we're horrified and we're disgusted and we're angry about it, right? And I'm not talking shit about her because I actually like her and her music, but Miss Cardi B, bless, 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 of course, has admitted to roofing men and robbing them and stuff, and we celebrate her. Why? I'm not trying to talk shit. I'm not trying to dig up stuff. I'm just saying that there's a double standard there that I think people forget. There's double standards. Men get away with things and it's awful. Women get away with the same thing and it's like not as bad. Well, you know, God knows what she's been through and she's just getting what's hers. I mean, the last podcast about Eileen Wuornos is us sort of celebrating her murdering people. We are not celebrating murder. It's a dark humor kind of thing, but you get what I'm saying. I think that we all need to hold the people that we know accountable. If you have, as a female, and you have a female friend that just is treating these men like absolute garbage, call her on that shit. Say, hey, bitch, we do not need to be treating men like that. What did he ever do to you? He seems like a cool guy. Quit being a bitch. In men, when you hear your bros talking about, well, you know, I fucked this chick, blah, 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 you need to be like, that is douchebaggery of the highest degree. Man, this is 2026. We're not trying to be like this. We're not caveman thumping women over the head and dragging them around, getting onto them because they have shoes on in the kitchen. Okay? Both sides need to get the fuck over themselves and do better and hold each other accountable. We have to take care of each other because, again, as I said, no one else is going to. We need to take this into our own hands politely and with peace and with love. Stop it. All right, have a good day. Bye.
Anybody who killed more than 2 or 3 people was a mass murderer. And whether it was all at one place or over an extended period of time. And then in the early 80s, they came up with this differentiation called serial killing.